Hello everyone, and welcome to Game 3 of the 2013 World Chess Championship match between Viswanathan Anand and Magnus Carlsen. Now, if you've seen my previous two videos, then you know Game 1 was a relatively short game. Carlsen had the white pieces. Game 2 was, there was a bit more fight in Game 2, but also the game ended in, well, not the quickest of draws, but a relatively quick draw. And if you consider Game 1 was definitely at least a moral victory for Carlsen, as he... I meant for Anand, as he really, really prepared well for that game, and he said Carlsen has nothing with the white pieces. And the second game did kind of go to Carlsen, but then we returned to game number 3. And here, as Carlsen didn't really have any problems in game 1, but he didn't really achieve anything in game 1. So maybe he will definitely change something to his approach. The question is what? So before we check out the game, and this is a very nice game, an incredibly fighting game, let's check out some of the photos from round 3. So here we have another photo from the opening. Photographers still behind the glass wall, nothing out of the ordinary here. Although we did see in my video from game 2 that Carlsen does have those soda bottles with his name on it, although you will never actually see the soda bottles during the games, or maybe we will. We'll have to see the entire series to figure this out. So here we have another photo, and here a nice close-up of Magnus Carlsen. So let's check out the game. So here we have knight to f3, Carlsen opens, d5, g3, g6, and here in game number 1, Carlsen went for bishop to g2, but here he mixes things up with the early c4, so still deciding what he will do with the d-pawn. And here Anand immediately captures it, d captures on c4. Carlsen goes queen to a4. Knight to a3 is also possible, going for the pawn this way, but Anand has a couple of nice victories with the black pieces in this line, so instead Carlsen goes for queen to a4. Definitely a prepared variation, and he thinks that Anand will maybe not do so well in this line. Knight to c6, bishop to g2 now, bishop to g7, and now knight to c3. e5, we have queen captures on c4 and knight g to e7. We have castles, and d3 now. h6, bishop to d2, and knight to d4. This was considered a novelty at the time, although it seems Anand found this novelty over the board, because it's very hard to consider that he was prepared for this variation. Usually bishop to e6 is played here, simply developing a piece while attacking the queen, but here after knight to d4, it's a very interesting move, now delaying the development of this bishop, but the bishop can now be developed to e6, but also to g4. So giving Carlsen a lot to consider here. Carlsen immediately grabs the knight, we have knight captures, e captures, and now knight to e4. c6, and now comes bishop to b4. This was considered to be an inaccuracy by Carlsen, but the line that was suggested after the game as an improvement, not an easy one to find over the board. Queen to c1, simply going after the h6 pawn. And now after f5, attacking the knight, knight moves, king to h7 defending, now simply bring the queen back to c4. And you've improved the position of your knight, you've well, ruined black's king side quite a bit, and you've returned the queen to c4, a nice active square, and the rooks are ready to be developed. So it seems very simple, but when you're playing the game, you know, it's very hard to find things like this. So after c6, bishop to b4, pinning Anand's knight on e7, we have bishop to e6, attacking the queen. Now queen to c1, although queen to c1 now is without a tempo, the h6 pawn is under no attack. Bishop to d5, and now a4. We have b6, bishop to e7, capturing, queen captures, and now comes a5. This was a very exciting moment in the game. Anand is better here. He has the bishop pair, his position is excellent, and f5 is coming. Carlsen will really have to figure out what to do here. He will be completely passive if this is allowed. And he finds a very nice active idea, that is a5. And by playing a5, he has to consider a whole lot of things. Of course, b captures on a5 is out of the question. There's really no reason to do this. Pushing b5, again, doesn't really make any sense. Queen to c5 really activates the queen, will either force an exchange of queens or create a very nice square for the knight on c5. Another thing to consider is f5. So does a5 prevent this f5 move? In fact, it does, because after knight to d2, you can't really capture on e2. If queen captures, then rook to e1, and then you have to bring your queen out of the game. For example, queen to h5, now comes a captures, bishop captures with check, captures, rook captures, and after queen to c6, the black queen is out of the game, but the white queen is extremely active. She'll start grabbing those pawns. A much better position for white. And the reason you have to bring your queen out of the game after this f5 move, and like we said, knight to d2, if you capture and then rook e1, you cannot capture the pawn on d3. This is the whole point. You have to move the queen. If you capture it, then bishop to f1, and your queen is trapped on d3. There is nowhere to go. Another idea after this f5 and knight to d2, you could exchange bishops first. The bishop captures, king captures, and only then capture on e2, but still it doesn't help you. A captures on b6, and now the point is you cannot recapture on b6. If you recapture, then rook captures, and now rook to e1. Queen captures on d3, and now again queen captures on c6. The whole point of this entire a5 move is that the queen will always capture on c6 with an attack on the rook. So after queen blocks this, then comes queen captures on g6, and black's position is shattered. White will be better here. So after this a5 move, Anand figures this out, and he plays rook 8 to b8, not going for this f5 move. Now, after all is said and done, Carlsen plays rook e1, and now the e2 pawn is protected, so f5 is no big deal. Rook f to c8, Anand is now preparing to push those pawns. We have a captures, pawn captures, and queen to f4 now. We have rook back to d8. Anand doesn't allow Carlsen to take any advantage of the d6 square. Carlsen plays h4, king to h7, and now knight to d2. A very dangerous move. If h4 was already played, then h5, g5, queen to f5 check would have been a simpler way to go about this. But Carlsen really goes and complicates things. Knight to d2, and now he really, the queen doesn't have a good retreat path. So Anand immediately takes advantage of this. Bishop to e5, attacking the queen, queen to g4, and now h5. And the queen is really running out of squares to hide. Queen to h3, and now bishop to h6. Now Carlsen plays queen to h1. And if you look at this, Anand forced Carlsen's queen all the way to h1, and it will be extremely hard to get this queen back into the game. Anand pushes c5. Now he is ready to push b4, c4, b3, b2, and Carlsen definitely has to do something about this. Carlsen plays knight to e4, and when Carlsen played knight to e4, a lot of grandmasters said that this is in fact the losing move of this game. Or that the position that arises after knight e4 is a losing position for white. They suggested b3, simply stopping black's expansion on the queen side. But interestingly, knight to e4 is definitely all right, and it is a move recommended by the engine. So king to g7 was played. Now comes knight to g5, attacking the bishop there. We have b5. Now comes e3. D captures on e3, rook captures on e3, and bishop to d4. And this was also one of the more critical moments in the game. Here, Anand doesn't capture the b2 pawn, when in fact capturing the b2 pawn is definitely the way to go. After you capture, yes, rook 8 to e1 is coming, and there will be a very nice attack on this c6 pawn, but this is the variation you have to find. Rook to d6 defending, and now bishop to d5, of course. This is the idea, piling up on the bishop on e6. Now comes bishop to d4, attacking the rook. Knight captures, pawn captures, rook captures, rook captures, rook captures, and this is now the move you had to find in order to be able to capture the pawn on b2, queen to f8. Now you get out of the attack, but also threaten queen captures on f2, checkmate. And now after white defends this, either with rook to e2 or maybe queen to g2, doesn't really matter, rook e2. Now b4 is coming, and it's still going to be a much better position for black. It's hard to say if black can push this to a win, but this pawn is a pass pawn, and you know, it's a pretty fast pass pawn, so it wouldn't be all that simple for white to stop this. Definitely the way to go, but to be able to capture, bishop captures on b2, you have to find that queen to f8 move. If you don't, then it will be very hard to capture the pawn. So instead, Anand plays bishop to d4. He attacks the rook, rook to e2, now the b2 pawn is defended, and now c4. Anand continues pushing on the queen side. Knight captures on e6, f captures on e6, and now bishop to e4. Rook to a6 was also an idea, but Carlsen prefers bishop to e4. We have c captures on d3, and now rook to d2. A pawn sacrifice, but it will give Carlsen a lot of activity. And here again, Anand goes for queen to b4. Again, you should take advantage of the f-file. With rook to f8, then you pretty much force matters into black's advantage. After bishop captures on d3, now comes queen to d6, threatening queen captures on g3 as the f-pawn is pinned. So after you prevent this, queen to g2, then comes rook captures on f2. Rook captures, and now the other rook comes to f8. You are attacking the pinned piece on f2. After rook blocks, then comes rook captures, 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 and captures, and you will get a queen and pawn endgame where black is up a pawn. And you know, this should be winning for black. If black could win this, it would have to be tested, but definitely the position you would want to go to. But Anand doesn't go for rook to f8, he goes queen to b4, attacking the rook on d2. Rook 8 to d1, defending, and now again rook to f8 is possible, but now it's not so strong as a move before. So here Anand pretty much forces matters. He plays bishop captures on b2. We have queen to f3. Bishop to f6, getting out of the way, and now rook captures on d3. Rook captures, and here rook to d8. We have rook captures, bishop captures, and now bishop to d3, putting pressure on that b5 pawn. Bishop captures on g6 doesn't really do all that much for white. After bishop captures, king captures, yes, you do have queen to d3 check and winning the bishop, so you did win a pawn here. But after king f7, queen captures, queen e1 check, king moves, and now b4. It's only black. If white makes a mistake, it's only black that can take advantage of this position. White can't really take advantage of this position. So after this bishop to d8, Carlsen goes bishop to d3. We have queen to d4. Here Anand offers Carlsen his extra pawn, so basically offering a draw. Bishop captures on b5 is played, and now queen to f6. Anand offers a trade of queens and offers a draw, but it's in this position that Carlsen actually declines the draw. He plays queen to b7. This is move 41. This comes with check. Time control has been reached, and he forces Anand to play on. Well, it's a completely drawn position. Maybe with the queens on the board, okay, white does have a slightly better pawn structure, but it's impossible to believe that this could turn out any other way than a draw. But either he wants to play on, maybe just tire Anand for the next round, or maybe it's some sort of psychological warfare, or maybe it's just to annoy him. Carlsen forces Anand to play this game on. So bishop to e7 blocking, king to g2, we have g5, h captures, queen captures, bishop to c4, and now h4. Here you don't really achieve anything by playing bishop captures. Still captures, queen d2. This comes with check, and black will be able to force a perpetual check and draw the game this way. So after h4, queen to c7 is played by Carlsen. We have h captures, queen captures on g3, and now e5. King to f3. Now finally Anand captures the queen, queen captures, pawn captures, bishop to c5, and after king e4, bishop to d4. This is now a completely drawn endgame. Bishop to f2, king e5, capturing, and bishop captures on g3 with check, but in this position the players finally agreed to a draw. So definitely a very interesting and a very fighting game where only Anand had some chances to actually win this game. So although it's a third game in a row that was drawn in this match, definitely another moral victory for Viswanathan Anand, as was the one in game 1. So definitely Carlsen will have to change his approach in game 5 when he once again gets the white pieces. So that's the game 3 of the 2013 World Chess Championship match between Anand and Carlsen. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Danny McCullough, TK Griffiths, Kyle Pasco, Tang Rong, and Douglas Rife for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. They will both be from this match, Game 1 and Game 2. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon with Game 4 of this wonderful historic match. So thank you all, and I'll see you soon.